Right. Hello. Good morning. Welcome back to Compulsion. I'm your host, Phil Harris, and with me I have Iain Lowson.
Hello.
And Kevin Beimers. And we are here to talk. It's sort of the second part of world building, and you've built your world, or been completely put off it after the first talk, because you've just gone, I can't define shoes. I just can't do it anymore.
What shoes is he wearing?
I was sleeping. All the dreams last night had shoes. I was just like, they were ghosts, and I was wondering what shoes they were wearing. This morning we're going to talk a bit about society and building a society into your game and what type of society that has. Now, obviously, Iain's done Dark Harvest, which is a deep, involved society and political structure in place. And Kevin's done Hector Badge of Carnage, which has a different type of society in place. But it's definitely not a linked game as far as I can see.
I'll try my best to apply what I know to this subject.
And I had an argument with the police this morning, so that makes me justifiably right to be talking on this. So one of the main issues for me about creating a society is you've got to know what you're creating your society for. There's no point in creating a cute game about rabbits fighting zombies. Thank you. But about rabbits fighting zombies in a green and pleasant land, and then having a big sociological thing about nuclear weapons, which is on the side, because it doesn't seem to fit into the idiom. So you don't have to do that. You need to concentrate on how the rabbit structure is done. We'll ship down some amazing book for producing a structure of how rabbits society works. So you need to concentrate on the elements that you're there. And as we said yesterday, if there's something that isn't there, you don't have to describe it, but you've got to be prepared that if the players go down that path or want to explore that path or want to do something like that, then they will, but you have an answer for them. So I'll start with Kevin today.
Yeah, why not? I'd say when Phil first asked me to be part of this panel, I sort of say, well, what do I know about making a political structure or making a sociological structure? And I suppose in terms of video games, and which I assume would be one of the things that applies to making a rule book for a tabletop, it all boils down to having a set of rules that these people follow, or you've got your character that you control. And he's got motivations, and he's got things that made him who he was today. And he's in a world that is full of other people who have been made in a particular way because of 700,000 years of history, or whether it's
7 seconds.
7 seconds, whatever it is. But for example, at the moment, I mean, you used Hector as an example. I'm about to go into making this Schrodinger's cat game, as you've heard me probably talking about.
Really, Kevin? Are you doing it?
I am doing a game. It's about Schrodinger's cat.
Is it physics-based?
And in that game, one of the things I've got to do in terms of making a set of puzzles to build a game around is I've got a set of particles and all these particles are they have become animals. They're these personified and anthropomorphized animal-like bosons and gluons and leptons, and they're all running amok in the particle zoo, and the quarks, of course. So it's now my job to say, well, what makes these things work, and what are the rules that they have to follow? Because when you're making the game, I don't have the versatility to have a complex social structure, but I at least have to have some sort of system in place that says, if a lepton meets a boson, what's going to happen? Who's going to run away? Who's going to attack? Who's going to, is one going to stomp and the other going to scream? Is he going to call his friends over? But in that sense, I'm boiling down to sort of an animal societal structure where, for example, in the game, I've got the gluons are kind of, they have the curiosity of monkeys, and they're sort of like these, you think about them as jelly monkeys. They'll pop out and look at you as you pass by, and when you're looking the other way, they'll swoop down and take one of your quarks, unless you get them first. And the more of them there are, the bolder they get. So if you've found your way into a herd of them, gulp, 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 all your guys are gone. As opposed to the bosons, which has they're a bunch of solitary things. You've got W's and Z's, and this all comes from particle physics. But anybody who knows what they're talking about with that, there's a W plus and a W minus, and they're each other's antiparticles. And the Z's are its own antiparticle. So two Z's meet, they eliminate each other. Two W's meet, they eliminate each other. And so to turn those into animals, I've said, okay, everybody's solitary. The W's are the males and the Z's are the females. If two males meet, they're very solitary and they will fight each other and eliminate each other. Same if two females meet. The W's aren't able to move. You're not able to physically move them because they're like elephants but larger. They're these grand behemoths of the particle world. But the Z's are indirectly responsible for momentum and movement, and so you can push them around. So the key to working the boson levels are you find yourself a Z boson, push her, the female, until you find a W boson, and then make that W boson follow the Z boson until you find a second W, so they eliminate each other. So you can see it's like, it gets really complex of thinking what happens when a couple of animals run into each other. And it's not just the case of he takes 3 hits and he takes 2. He'll attack and he'll run away. I think it's a lot more fun when you get a puzzle where it's not just pushing blocks around, but you're pushing blocks with attitudes, basically. So in that sense, I guess I do have a concept of working out a simple set of rules that defines how something works, and that in turn defines the puzzles that I'm able to make out of that system. And in doing so, I've got one page, like I said, I've got about 15 different variations on the animals that could meet, which means I've got a page and a half of who would win in a fight in a document. And I had to work all that stuff out because someday the programmer is going to say, uh-oh, we've got a muon and a zozon in the same room. Well, what's going to happen? Are they both going to attack you? Are they going to attack each other? Are they going to attack your people? Is one going to run away? Is one going to come back? And you need all that stuff in place in order to keep moving. And you have to, if somebody asks a question, you got to have an answer ready.
That's great, Ian.
What he said.
That's cool, we're finished.
I mean, and that, my friends, is how you build a world. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, that is basically it. I mean, it's with Dark Harvest. I mean, it's the same thing. You have different, any society, you put any number of people in a room and you get dynamics like that. You get the dominant person, you get the submissive person, you get the quiet one who's a bit dangerous. You've got all those kind of characters. I was reminded of Christopher Brickmeyer. Come in! Oh, we can start now. Good. Everyone look at him. Sir Christopher Brickmeyer wrote a book, one of his amazing books, set in a prison. And he spends some time, one of his main characters, a journalist, Jack Parlebane, gets sent to prison for something he absolutely did do. But he talks about the different characters you meet in prison and the different nicknames they are afforded. And it's that kind of thing. I mean, one of my favourites is the Rocket. The Rocket is a guy who will go off like that for no reason. He'll just explode and just attack something. No reason. And the reason will be different each time he does it. It's just, it's that time of day, I'll kill somebody. So, each group of people, and as those groups go up, the dynamics are basically the same. So when you've got a political situation, when you've got a society, the rules of society, they are to allow for that, and they are those same things but just made bigger. And it's like, the idea of you have that particle in the room and that particle in the room and they'll interact in that kind of way. It's if you've got, that's your rank structure in society. If you've got a police chief in a room with a police sergeant, the police sergeant defers to the chief. But then if you chuck a politician in, chances are your police chief is going to defer to the politician. But equally, the politician might want to talk to the police sergeant because that gets him an inside track on what the police chief's up to and how the police chief is passing down the legislations that the politician would like to see happen. So it is that same thing. It's how these particles interact. So when you're structuring, a lot of time when you're looking at your game, you might think, oh God, politics is so complicated, and it's really not. It's particles in a room bouncing off each other, and it's the relationships between those characters. But the thing with your game, and it's the same with video games, it's the same with tabletop games, it's the same with board games. There has to be room for the players to fit into that. The players have to have fun with that. They have to be challenged by that. But if you do it right, if you have the right, if you have the right rules for your particles, when the players come in, they might not think they are, but they're going to be a particular type of particle. So however they bounce off each other is going to automatically create situations that suggest themselves.
And what Ian's pointing out is a really, really solid point of the group dynamic is its own society within the society that as a whole. For years I've done science fiction games and other types of games where people have carried guns. And I've always automatically tried to make them military because it gives them the justification to carry guns rather than to try and explain in these free and great societies why everybody wanders around with at least like 4 types of weaponry and possibly explosive devices, because it doesn't fit with the culture. There's got to be a reason that they're there. There's got to be a reason that they've been given the right to have those type of things. And I think that's quite important as well. It's just got to be coherent. So if you turn around to them and say you can't take guns onto this planet, they've got to know why. It's just the law of the planet. That's how it is. And then they'll try and smuggle them in various ways, cutting off their foot and remodelling the guns.
Because how the kind of obstruction the players will encounter in bringing those guns into that society is defined by why that society banned weapons. If you have a situation, for example, in America, where in its past people were allowed to carry firearms, and people who don't think clearly and who have a tendency to walk into walls unless you instruct them how to use a door, think that a gun is freedom. They see it. I mean, it's or they are scared of other people with guns, so they have to have guns.
I'm Canadian, by the way.
Yeah. So bringing a gun into a society like that, all you're really having to defeat are the customs. Once you've got the gun in, you're going to encounter, chances are, a lot of people who are going to go, oh cool, you got a gun in, well done. And they're not going to report you to the authorities. They're not going to phone somebody up and say, we saw a guy with a gun, you better arrest him. They're going to get their mates around and they're all going to be asking to buy your gun perhaps, or whatever. If you're coming into a society where there was something happened in the past where people came with guns, a lot of people got killed, and they're ashamed of their own past where they had lots of guns and lots of people got killed. When you get to customs and you beat customs, you're still going to have that same situation when you're wandering around. If you've got a gun, people are going to phone the police. So you've got to think to yourself, it's not just a case of, yeah, guns are banned. Why are they banned? What sort of society? Again, it's like we were saying yesterday, it's ask the questions. Why? What? Where? When? How did that happen? Why does that situation exist? Because that will give you so much more that you can drop into your game setting, that you can throw at your players and say, your player goes, okay, I pull my gun out. What's going to happen when he pulls that gun out? What's the reaction going to be of the crowd? Is it going to be, whoa, cool, or is it going to be,
get him?
Right, okay, right, we're not. Are the people going to run away, or are they going to form a line and stand in front of that person and say, no gun, you don't do that here? Because, how are your players going to react to that? Are they going to shoot everybody? Are they going to back off? And all of a sudden you've got a whole scenario opening up in front of you from the simple statement of you cannot bring guns into this country, planet, whatever.
So there was a situation when we were first developing Schrodinger's cat into all the different worlds he could possibly go in. And it was just a whole big game of what if this happened? What if we turned everything on its head? And I wrote a cutscene which I was never able to develop into an actual game episode or a level. But I thought the idea was so funny of the cat landing in a triangular universe where he lands on a triangular planet filled with triangular people living in a triangular town, and he loses the box that he travels in, right? And he somehow gets separated from the box and approaches the town and begins to talk to the first triangle he meets, asking him if he's seen the box. And the triangle's like, "What's a box?" And he says, so 4 sides, square. And he's like, "I don't know what you're saying, man." And the triangle has no concept of a number higher than 3. It's everybody talks about mathematics being the universal language. If we meet aliens, we can show them a couple of equations and show that we're all clever people and talk on that level. But this is this whole town, this whole society has arisen without any idea of the concept of a number beyond 3. It's like, well, how do you count things? He's like this, 1, 2, 3, and you're done. And he said, well, yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4. And he's like, "You're joking. Hey, get a load of this guy." And they call their friends over and they say, "You gotta listen to this guy. He's nuts." And it's just, all I was doing was playing with the idea. And in the end, it was a really funny cutscene because I like writing cutscenes where one or more parties ends in utter bafflement by the end of it. But the idea of having a culture that had no concept of a number over 4 was really intriguing to me. And what would they respond to when you suggested that there was something higher? And it went on for another page, and then the priest triangle shows up and tries to disperse the crowd from this heresy that's going on, and it'll become an allegory. And he says, okay, he's a crowd of 50 people, and he's like, well, how many people do you see here right now? He's like, I don't know, about 3. And then the priest is like, all right, you 3 get back to work. And 3 was the only number. But in the end, it's a real extreme, ridiculous situation that you probably aren't going to write into your tabletop games, and which just means I don't mind giving it away. But I don't mind talking openly about that one if anybody wants to run with it. But that was their society, and they had to abide by those rules, and it made it fun.
When I was writing the 7 nanoseconds of background history for Distant Star, it was really, really important that basically there's 3 tribes of humanity who have split off, and I had a sort of start point and an end point, and then it was just like you can just fill in the gaps, and they're all quite distinct by the time that they get to the end point for lots of different reasons. And there's certain things I can't talk about, there's certain things I can. And with one of the groups of people, the Akari, it was really, really important that they were nomadic, and I had to work out how their culture and structure was working as a nomadic race. Why was it working that way? It became a military junta because it was the logical thing to do. They were on the run, and much like I found Battlestar Galactica slightly unrealistic with we've got the friendly people side of the military junta. We're getting on together, and then there's an overthrow, which is it's to do with a spiritual belief. It's not a religion, but it overthrows it, and with that overthrow comes a new language, and naturally I had to think of that language, and then I developed that language because it made more sense to the race, and it meant that everything that they said, which used the language, was really, really strong. And the idea concerning the language was basically they because data became so easy to lose, because ships would go down and then the data on that ship would be lost, and the computers couldn't hold everything. They started using a phonetic language, and they started tattooing their bodies with a phonetic language, starting at the birth point, which is the belly button, and circling out. And I was like, I wonder if there's any races on Earth who've actually used a phonetic language. There's one in northern Canada, an Inuit a tribe who use a phonetic language. So everything has more than one meaning depending on how you're describing it. So that you can write this, and it's got layers and layers and layers layers of history when you write it. And then in the spiritual way, when these people die, they skin them and they hold the skins in the adjectum, which is this point of spiritual worthiness, because it's the family story. It becomes the skin story and it becomes important to them. And all these elements just slowly built up, and I was just like, no, I need to answer this, and I need to answer this. And I didn't need to, without joking aside, I didn't need to know what shoes they wore, but if that had been important, then as you sort of develop things out, you sort of see where different things needed to be answered. It just, you need to just follow it on a bit of a logical track, because I think I think a lot of fantasy writers write very, very flat worlds because they've not even thought of the background. Legend of Thomas Covenant and the Unbeliever being one of my most hated fantasy novels, especially because I love giants. I think giants is a misused fantasy trope, and he makes them the dullest, most boring things ever. But on another note, I think going back to society structure, you also have. I'm not a big fan of BioWare games because I always get to a point in a BioWare game and go, why the hell am I hanging out with these people? I absolutely detest the majority of them. And I don't care how bad the situation is, I would have still probably put knife, bullet or something through their heads.
That is a very good point. Something I was wanting to bring up is relatability. And this, you're going to have to bear with me because I know we have a Tory government at the moment, so this is difficult, but nobody actually sets out to be the villain. Not even David Cameron wanted to be the villain. He is.
Can you see where this is going?
But I would say joking aside, but who's joking? When you have a society, you look at something like, people bandy around the word evil, without really fully understanding what evil is. Evil is an entirely destructive thing, and I hate seeing headlines where they say this evil person, because as soon as you say that, you're allowing yourself to not understand that person. You're allowing yourself to not understand that state, that society, because you have to understand that. You have to look at what motivated that person. Because only by doing that can you make sure that doesn't happen again, or that you'll be aware of when it is happening. So when you're building a society, no matter how radical that society is, and no matter how much you want that society to be the villain, you have to understand that for the people, certainly the people running that society, they are not the villains. They are not bad people, or they do not perceive themselves as such. They maybe have an understanding that what they're doing is bad, but they will have something that they're trying to achieve by that, something they're trying to build by that, even if it's just to keep themselves safe, to keep their family safe, to keep their friends safe. That's a constructive thing, and is in itself, that is not an evil goal. That desire to protect, to be safe, to gather to yourself, that's something that motivates everybody. It's how you do it becomes the problem. So when you create a society, even if they are to be the villains, if you make them purely destructive, purely evil, and everything else, you remove the relatability, and you remove that point of contact. It's much more interesting, and this is something that I definitely wanted to do with Dark Harvest. I wanted that point where you read through what Frankenstein is doing, and you go, actually, that makes complete sense. That point of going, yeah, why shouldn't someone who is a major figure in industry, who is inventing things and creating jobs and bettering society, why should we lose that person to disease? Why should we lose that person to an accident when they have so much that they can offer us? Why shouldn't we be able to literally rebuild that person, keep that person alive so that they can continue to develop things? Why should Stephen Hawking be trapped in that chair? Why should we have to lose him? It's an absolute injustice. It's horrible. So why, if that opportunity was there to to have him be able to walk about and to talk and to keep doing what he's doing to advance our knowledge and our understanding. Why shouldn't we do that? But then you look at the creature who's saying, yeah, but why should all these rich people who just happen to be rich, why should they be able to live forever by abusing legislation so they can see a poor person and, you know, well, that guy's got nice muscly arms, I'll have them for the next party I'm going to. Why should that person be allowed? So you kind of look at the resistance and say, yes, this has to be stopped. But then the creature also wants to stop the good stuff. So you've got that everything we do as people has areas of grey. There's very little black, there's very little white. Everything is shades of grey. Sorry if you haven't worked that out in life, that's a bit of a spoiler. But grey is so much more fun to play in. Grey is so much more interesting, and it's so much more frustrating, and it's so much more joyful, and it's... Don't be afraid of grey. Don't be afraid of making your villain. The best Bond villains, the best villains of all times are the ones that you look at and you go, do you know, I see where you're coming from. And I hate myself for it, but you know, yeah, I can see how I could have ended up in that situation. Mm-hmm. It's one of the great missed opportunities with the way, you know, Anakin Skywalker's fall was eventually described. You have to go into the detail of it to see. Darth Vader was a horrible person, but you can completely see this was a guy who was afraid of losing his wife, and who was offered a way out, who was offered a chance to save his wife, someone he loved.
However badly
it was.
You know what? I'm sorry. The only cure for saving your wife is to kill all the children on the planet. Go ahead. I would totally do that.
So yeah, don't.
Younglings, not children.
There's reasons why. You know, there are always reasons why, and there are always good reasons why. There are always perfectly valid reasons why things go horribly wrong, and there's perfectly valid reasons why things go horribly right. And just make sure you explore those reasons, because again, there's nothing better than, you know, your characters bursting into this evil dictator's house to find him standing in front of his wife and kids, going, you know, let them go, and all of a sudden it's like, oh.
No, you're a human being.
This is a man with a wife and kids, and he loves his family, and we're here to kill him.
Yeah, well, born identity right there.
This explains my 8-year-old granddaughter why you must kill her favourite grandfather before you do so.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. There was something I watched, I can't remember what it was now, fairly recently, where they did almost exactly that. And it was a real moment of, oh, right, yes. Suddenly all my reasons are invalid. You know, your argument does not count.
I mean, I think that's why a lot of video games default to zombies or Nazis, or, you know, it's that sort of the idea that the swastika means evil, or the idea that these soulless beings just want to eat your flesh. It's easy because they have no other motivation other than to attack anything that moves, and, you know, whatever happens to be, it's like, well, let's just put a bunch of them out there and you can kill them at will, or, you know, the ogres or whatever it happens to be. That these mindless beings are easier to run through with a gun and eliminate. The stormtroopers, perfect example. You know, at somebody maybe in the first three, by which I mean 4, 5, and 6, would watch the stormtrooper bits and go, okay, well, they're just they're just troops. They're
faceless.
Yeah, they're faceless. But then you sort of go, oh, well, maybe there really are people under there. And then you get to Attack of the Clones, and you go, oh, well, they're actually just clones, so they're not even people once you get under there. So that's still okay to have this, well, not mindless force, but a personality-less.
Well, that's why I like the Clone Wars animated series, because you start to explore the fact that, yes, these guys were created as this mindless organic fighting force who could improvise a bit. But then over time they developed personalities. They developed a desire to be more than they were. And all of a sudden you're kind of going, you're having to question stuff that you maybe didn't question before. Yeah. And I think that's suddenly where it becomes so much more interesting.
And that's what Lucas wouldn't have written then. Yeah, the Nazis one is a big one for me. I am a bit of background. My mother was born in before occupied Germany, and she was in occupied Germany. And my grandfather was put in a concentration camp because he was helping, because the Nazis stopped the education of Jews and Quakers and things like this, and he was still educating them. And he was put in concentration camp, and my grandmother used to carry around 2 heavy shopping bags after that all the time, and the family was still being observed by the SS. The reason she carried 2 heavy shopping bags around all the time, including to church on Sundays, was that she didn't have to salute Heil Hitler to the officers in the street, and that's resistance. That's resistance, pure and simple. For me, that's one of those. I appreciate the people who fight, but when you can't fight, if you can resist in another way, and it becomes more powerful. One of the reasons I really don't deal with like Nazis in any of my games is because I've seen my mother's certificate to show that she's of an Aryan background, going back 5 generations, and stamped with the Reichstag on each generation to prove that she comes from effectively true German stock. And all I needed to do was see that to understand the oppression that was going on there. And it's not something that you can quite easily translate into games. I run very dark games in a lot of ways, and as my players would like tell you, but it's a very, very hard thing to deal with. And if you are going to like explore a culture or an extreme like situation, always look at the background stuff. If you want to run something in Germany and you want it to really, really feel like it, Maus is an amazing source of like information on it. MAUS. It's a comic, but it's basically, it talks about the occupation, but it's told with like mice and rats, and it's just so powerful. It really, really is.
Again, this kind of comes back to something I said earlier about people use the label of evil and say that's it, that's great, we don't have to understand it. If you look at any point in history, and we're using Nazis as an example, and I will say right now, I'm not defending what they became, but you have to understand that when, for the German people, people go, how could they possibly become Nazis? How could they possibly support that? You have to look at the fact that they were a people who were beaten and abused by France, Britain. They had. It was said during the peace conference, a couple of very, very wise people said, if we destroy Germany in this peace, this is going to happen again. If we make an enemy of these people in this, for reparations and everything else, we are building up trouble for the future. He said, paraphrasing hugely. The French weren't willing to listen because they had been battered and bloody during the First World War, and they wanted vengeance, which is kind of understandable. But they created the situation, they created the economic and the social conditions that created the Nazi Party.
My mum still remembers her grandmother going to buy a loaf of bread with a pram of money. Yeah. Because the economy was that's collapsed.
And we cannot say how dare they do this. We have to say how dare the Allied governments after the First World War, how dare they do that to future generations. You have to understand that the Nazi Party said, we will help our people. We will rebuild our economy. And then they did. They rebuilt their economy from nothing. And they made their country strong again, and then they proceeded to fuck it all up.
And very often you don't see that you're part of the oncoming shadow.
Yeah.
And then I know another friend who has an Austrian family. He'd always tried to talk to his grandparents about the war, and they'd refused. And then just before his grandfather died, he sort of talked to him, but he still didn't tell him the full story. But he talked to him about knowing that there was some Jewish farmers down the road and the SS coming and saying, are there any Jews in the town? And him saying yes. And it's this horrendous guilt that he was part of an extermination, and this realization after the fact.
But, and then again, going back to the simplicity of boiling stuff down to a set of rules, the video game industry, at the last game jam I was at, I overheard one of the other teams saying, we haven't yet decided whether these should be zombies or Nazis. And it is that the mindless troops coming at you can be any one of those things, and it's an easy target. So I guess that's a bit of misunderstanding, and it's very much a simplified factor, like I was saying about the particles. They run, they fight, they come at you, they run away, but it's a set of rules, and it's the paint that you throw, or it's the skin you put over top of your baddies.
Yeah, it's why I like stuff like how many people play Dishonored, the video game. That's a cracking environment because again there are people doing bad things, but there are no bad guys. It's you work your way through and you listen to people talking, and they're normal people, and you can understand the motivations of the guys who did what they did because they thought they were bettering society and helping themselves along the way. But that just makes it so much more interesting.
Or Deus Ex, where everybody's a bad guy in their own way, and you can kill your brother, and it changes the plot dramatically, and that's a real impressive game. But I appreciate we've been talking on. So questions.
Just one about video games. I mean, what I've kind of felt with looking at them is there's still a sort of problem with maturity in them. I mean, you look at something like Skyrim, for example, where everything is actually, it's slightly bland in that way. And it doesn't explore absolutely why, say, the good guys are the good, or why you've chosen this lot, the good guys are the good guys, bad guys, bad guys. It just goes, you go through this route and you get a little bit of propaganda and then you'll ignore it. I mean, I think my first playthrough, I was looking at the Stormcloaks and going, actually, they're somewhere in the background there is quite interesting plots about them being racist assholes, basically. But I kind of feel that, at least in video games, the industry doesn't seem ready for it. Is there something stopping that?
I think Skyrim went some of the way to dealing with that. It was quite nice with the choice you made. That wonderful choice. You're literally standing in a building on fire. With a guy over there saying, "Come this way," and a guy over there saying, "Come this way," and you're like, "Oh, that door's closer. I'll go there." It's literally that's your motivation. But I like the fact that the Imperials are going, look, really, we're bringing civilization to a place that kind of needs it. And you're looking around you going, yeah, they kind of do. Or you're the Stormcloaks going, we have a civilization. How dare these people come in here and do that? But that's not what the game's about. But it's nice that it's there anyway.
Yeah,
and that shows they're at least trying. Sorry.
No, my answer to that was, again, it boils down to simplicity, but it's when actually Iain and I did a talk last August at Edinburgh Interactive, and one of the first questions we asked, and I'll ask it here, how many people play video games, how many people skip the cutscenes? And how many people play them, they look for the cutscenes as a reward? Right? Now, I think it's
Thank you.
Yeah. Both Iain and I are big advocates of wanting to see better stories in video games. And when we asked it in this room, which was it was a bunch of people coming to a video game conference, it was 50-50. And it shows the difference in the people who are at this conference, that story is a big part of what you guys want to see. And that's so I'm trying to make a game that is appealing around, across the board. It's a puzzler and it's a platformer and that sort of thing. But I also want to make a point of having a really interesting cutscene and an interesting culture. And if you want to get deeper into it, I've got answers for you. But to the point where if you skip the cutscenes, you can still play the game. And that's kind of what the video game developers have to think about, in that when you're making all these different skins over top of get from A to B, killing as many people as you can, and there's a guy at B who will tell you where C is. And that is the basic, that's a first-person shooter. And then you put it in space, or you put it in Vietnam, or you put it in the center of the earth, or you put it in hell. And those skins go over top of the game, and you've got the same basic levels and same basic power-ups and same basic controls, because it's a safe bet that people will play that. And so the story does become secondary. You're a guy with a gun.
It becomes literally wallpaper. It's
It's
Rhiannon Pratchett's thing of, your most writers, when they come into a project, are there to put the wallpaper up.
Yeah, but we actually had somebody, when we were working on Hector, a team had made this race-based game for the iPhone, and they said, can you guys give us a story for it? And they said, okay, well, can we play it? And it's like, yeah, sure. And it's just like, well, we got 8 different characters and 8 different ships, and they fly around in a 3D thingy. And then they said, well, can you guys give us some cutscenes and stuff like that? And I was like, well, I suppose we can, but we kind of need to know more about how they got to this point and why they're doing what they're doing. And we start asking these questions. It's like, oh, is that really what the story has to do with it? You can't just go once upon a time.
And it's fascinating to talk about race games like Wipeouts. In the very first Wipeout game, it does this little brief history thing, and that does enough for it. It creates the atmosphere. You understand the environment and the world that you're building.
Even Angry Birds has that one opening picture of a bunch of birds going at the nest, and you pan across, and there's sneaky little pigs going off with the eggs. And it didn't need to be there. It was simple to put in, but it just makes you want to get the pigs.
I think in terms of maturity of the industry, I think things are starting to get better, because people are noticing that the games that do well have something in common, and it's that people give a monkeys for what's going on. I mean, as a games writer, I want to see a point when there are no cutscenes. I don't
because the gameplay is interesting on its own.
And horrible and clumsy and unpleasant. They take up a huge amount of budget that could be better spent on so many other things. I want the story, I want the narrative, shall I say, to be there from the beginning, because you don't need cutscenes to deliver a narrative. And if you have to rely on a cutscene entirely, you're not doing your job. You know, it's not being done right. And you get to Gears of War, the writer for that, God help her, was brought in and presented with a fait accompli. It was done. Gears of War was finished. And she was given this thing. There was 6 months or so of development to go, and she was given all the levels, and she was given all the environments and all the bad guys and everything else, and told, make this do things with story. And it's like, yeah, okay, Marines who whoop, shoot, kill, bad, yeah, that'll do. You can't, and now you've got, how many Gears of War are we on? 3, 4, are we on now?
Well, 3 finished it, so there was obviously a 4th.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just, like I said yesterday, do your world building, because you don't know what stories you're going to tell. If Gears of War had done its world building from the beginning, as opposed to retconning frantically so they could do more stuff, they would have known, even if they just thought, well, we're only going to do one game, we'll see what happens. They could have gone, whoopee, we get to do game 2. And we've got all this stuff we can explore. It's like with Halo, had an immense amount of stuff that they in that first game. It's why the first game is so good. You wander around and say, wow, where did this stuff come from? And it wasn't made by the guys I'm shooting, because they're going around going, wow, what is this stuff? But they know more than I do. This is great. They didn't do anything with any of that background of any interest outside of the books, which is the great crime of Halo. They could have done so much.
And I think another thing is that the video games industry is still in its infancy, and that's definitely an issue. I think we're at the sort of still in the silent films time for video games, if you put it against cinema. And my game of last year was Special Ops: The Line, because it suddenly just went, no, we can actually we can have a game where you kill people, and we can talk about killing and the greater nature of it and the psychological effects of it, and a whole bunch of other things. And
has anyone played that?
But
that's the problem with it. Not many people played it.
Yeah.
There's a moment in that, and we will not spoil it, because it is. There's a moment when you'll put down your controller and not want to play anymore.
It's the first video game where I switched off the TV and the console afterwards, and I sat down and had a think.
Yeah.
It was that powerful. And if you really, really want to experience the story, because there's a couple of the gameplay areas where it's just a little broken and they're hard to get through, and it unfortunately spoils the flow. I'd play it on easy. And just experience the story, and then go back if you want to achieve trophies and things like this. There's more than one ending, but it's it was just, it blew me away, and it was much more a story than I felt Journey was. I feel that unfortunately the games journalists, the video games journalists in particular, and I am one, and I used to be one. I used to run a magazine. They fan wank so much over these games, which they say this is story, this is what it should be, like Journey, which is a very nice game. I am not knocking Journey as a game, but it's not quite as incredible as people say.
But it's different, and
yeah.
that can be enough.
Yes, that's fair.
But I mean, to get back to role playing, all of that is valid in role playing. I mean, how many times have you get a thing where there's a very, very basic, some guys come in with a fantastic system. I thought, God, this is a great system. What do I play it in? Oh, it would do really well with a military game, so let's have Nazis as bad guys and we'll play their allies, and that's it. There's slightly change the names to protect the existing, and that's it. And you're left kind of going, well, yeah, nice system, but it didn't do anything. It's much more interesting if you world build it properly. If you are a systems person and you're not comfortable with world building, find someone who is. That's what these events are for. Bring your system and demo your system. Get someone who's excited about it, who comes along and says, oh man, that would really fit a world where there's this. Grab that person and say, tell me more, write it down. Here's my email address, and get together with that person.
Yeah.
That's why events like this are important.
Indeed.
Dark Harvest exists because of this event. So, yeah.
Expanding on that, the maturity of the people within the industry, both video games and role-playing games, because I know, video games are in their infancy, but from that point of view, so are role-playing games, because they're about the same age, give or take a few years. 74 for role-playing games and a few years before that for video games. However, there seems to be a bit more acceptance of controversy and the inclusion of social issues within role-playing games that there are within video games. I mean, you can take a look at Dark Harvest, and there is a great deal more in terms of the social study of what happens when you are oppressed. And you take a look at both sides of society, and it's very clear that both sides of society have very good reasons to want to be there. And you look at them from the player's point of view, and both societies are full of shit. But you basically, it's true, you basically have to choose one of those because those are the societies that are available. How do you implement those controversial points? How do you implement the inherent racism, the classism? How do you implement the homosexuality, sexism, your cliches? In a way that when people are going to read that book, they're not going to think, you pig, and throw it away.
But I think that's part of it. I think print has been around for much longer. Print. You'd say that role playing's been only around for recent times, and I agree. But print in itself has been around, and it's done all its controversial issues. It's covered its controversial issues. So once role playing grew up out of,
allow me to challenge that. You say that it's covered those issues, but if you take a look at the forums in Iain World, I started a thread a few months ago where I literally asked people, why are not we seeing more gay characters in role-playing games? Why isn't homosexuality included in role-playing games in a more obvious, present way as it is in our society today? And that sparked a huge row that people really made very obvious that people were not comfortable at the notion of running a gay character because they weren't gay, and because they weren't gay, they weren't thinking, well, I don't want to have sex with another man or another woman, so therefore I can't be gay.
They'll happily play an orc.
Exactly.
I mean, for me, it's like, for me personally, it's like, what's the difference?
Precisely.
It's a thing that you play an orc, or you play a mad scientist, or you're exploring something that is fun. But I think there are people who aren't ready to do that.
And there will always be. But even if we go for a subject that is slightly more acceptable, feminism in games, for example, where now we are seeing more people wanting to have proper female roles, and not just this chainmail bikini with a chainmail thong hanging from an altar kind of thing.
They are uncomfortable.
Indeed.
Well, you laugh now, you lent it to me.
But how
That
do
was
you
awkward
incorporate those? I mean, the question is, those issues are becoming more prevalent. They're becoming slightly more acceptable little by little with every time that they're incorporated in the game. How do you approach incorporating those issues in a game without antagonizing your potential customers?
By giving them the potential to do it. By in a sense, I mean, I would love to get to a point where, I mean, for me already, it feels like it feels like it should be a non-debate. I think it should be that, well, why it's more of a case of why don't we do it, and that's how I feel. Is why don't we do it? I mean, I've played female characters, and for the fun of it, and to explore stuff that I couldn't normally explore. And I wrote a gay character into a video game. If you play Wheelman, there's a gay character in Wheelman. But I didn't. But that wasn't his chief motivation. It just so happens that he was, and to me, that's more interesting. I don't want. Unless you want to explore that issue, and that is the overriding issue of that particular game or session or whatever. I think it should be accepted to the point of where it's not a big deal. But if for some people it is a big deal, or for a particular setting or a particular situation or something you're exploring, it needs to be a big deal. If that's what you're concentrating on. So with Dark Harvest, to take that example, I wanted to. You can do that. You can play those characters, and you can do those things. The book I'm writing at the moment, which is in its early stages, the first environment in the book is a sealed society where they have a very, very limited number of resources. Where population has to be controlled, not because the people at the top want to do it to, like, apologies if anyone's a Catholic, but in terms of major religion, they always want to control the population because that's what people in charge seem to want to do. They want to control people's sexuality, their reproductive potential, because that gives them control. So there's legislation in there. This is because they have to control the population, because if the population gets out of control, they can't feed them. They can't house them. There isn't enough. They can't build any more houses. They haven't got the resources. They haven't got the space. So the society that exists accepts homosexuality as being. It's almost a relief thing. It's like, because you can't breed, so it's more accepted in society as almost a safety valve. It's a way of blowing off steam, and I want to explore that within that book, and that's kind of an important thing within that book. And I want to do a role playing game. Once the book's written and everything else, I want to do the role playing setting so people can play with it. So it's not an issue in Dark Harvest because it's just part of society, but in the book I'm doing and the role playing game setting and everything else that will come out of that. It's a part of what is very, very intrinsically strong in that society, and if that alienates people, they need to maybe grow up a little.
I'd agree. Okay.
Well, I was going to make a quick point, sort of one of your sub questions in there about tabletop versus video games in dealing with big issues, and I think upon being here and this event kind of being one of my first forays into tabletop games, it's all about discussion, number one. It's about a whole bunch of people being in a room, and even if you only roll the dice once in the game and spend the rest of the time talking about what's going on right now, then you've had a social evening, and you've batted around a point that may apply to the game, may apply to greater society, but it's about talking to people as opposed to most of the time a video game, other than the live connect type stuff, but you play a video game to shoot things or to run around, and most of the time the video games are sort of a 2-hour escape, as opposed to a game that may take years for you to get to the end of, and you get together every Saturday and do and play it a little bit more and talk a lot more. So I think also with the always having a human game master, you have the ability to branch off in whatever direction if you've got an adaptable one, as opposed to a video game which is confined by the digital rules that you allow the game to play. You know, you can drive as far as you like in Grand Theft Auto outside of town. You may reach the end of the polygons and they'll just keep repeating them on random because there's a limitation of the amount of stuff that the computer can create for your whims. Whereas a GM is free to follow a whim for as long as you want to follow it, and may say, okay guys, let's get back to the city, or let's just stay out here and see what happens. So it's the adaptability of the human brain and the discussion of being around the table, I think, really allows the tabletop to talk about whatever issues, big or small, they're able to. And the video game is limited to what the programmers were able to put inside of it.
And unfortunately, we're going to have to tie up because this is a good subject. So I'm sorry that we've left. But as one last thing, I think that these elements can be dealt with in groups of players who've played together for a long time and can do it. And definitely in my groups, these things have been like dealt with and encountered, things like infidelity and stuff like this, and been dealt with in lots of different ways. And I've covered them in frivolous and serious ways, and it's to do with the understanding your players and understanding what they can do and what they can achieve, and the closer the bond you have with your players, the better you get a reaction out of them, to the point that one of my players systematically killed 5 other player characters over 2 sessions, and the other player characters were like, no, that was a really, really good move. They fought like forever to try and save themselves, but they knew exactly why he was doing it, because they were good friends and they understood what the whole concept of the game was, and they understood what they were. So I think it will come, but it's about understanding the people, and I think with role playing it will come faster, because you understand the groups of people around you better. And it comes back to what I was saying about print has gone through some of these things already, and so role-playing can follow because it's still print, while video games are a new medium in some ways, and they need to, it needs to grow up and it needs to discover its medium. But there's a lot more I can say about video games, but I'll possibly talk about some of that in the future of games as well.
Video games need to have the courage to offend.
Yeah.
Which, because of budgetary restraints and the fact that they've got to try to market to as large people as possible, they don't have the courage to offend. Which is what Spec Ops Line did. It had the courage to really offend its audience, particularly the shooter audience.
Yeah. But we have to close here. Sorry, we've got another talk coming in here. The next talk is about character art in this room. Then there's the Future of Games talk, which I think Kevin.